Welcome back to Disturbed Reality. When you think of a drug trafficker, certain images come to mind. Flashy cars, gold chains, social media flaunting, maybe even a larger-than-life personality straight out of a Netflix series. But Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, better known as El Mencho, doesn't fit that mold. He's elusive, quiet, and almost invisible, rarely photographed, rarely seen. Unlike others who bask in their infamy, El Mencho built his empire from the shadows. No social media stunts, no flashy interviews, just ruthless efficiency, military precision, and a cold, calculating grip on power. So who is the man behind the legend? How did a former police officer and avocado farmer become one of the most powerful and most feared drug lords in the world? But nevertheless, let's explore the rise of one of Mexico's most notorious traffickers, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, aka El Mencho. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, commonly known as El Mencho, was born on the 17th of July 1966 in the rural town of Naranjo de Chila, which is located in the southwestern region of Michoacan state. Nemesio was born one of 6 brothers, including Abraham and Antonio, who would also later become involved in organised crime, though it seems his 3 remaining brothers, Juan, Miguel and Martin, never entered the criminal underworld. The town of Mencho's birth is located on the edge of what is known as the Tierra Caliente region, which is known as the Hotland. It's a harsh, impoverished region, famous for producing agricultural products, both legal and illegal. Not much is known of El Mencho's parents, though it's stated that they were dirt poor and ran a small avocado production, with Mencho and his brothers frequently helping out tend to the crops. Though the money yielded through the harvests barely kept the family of 8 afloat. Eventually, Nemesio, along with his brothers, would help out even more with the avocado cultivation, and by around age 10 or 11, Nemesio dropped out of education completely to help his parents. But even at a young age, he realised that the family business could never lift himself or his family out of poverty. During Mencho's childhood in the 1970s, few could have ever imagined that he would make it out of his dire circumstances. However, luckily for El Mencho, in his local rural community resided a successful agricultural family known as the Valencias. The Valencia family's rise began with their success in the avocado industry in the state of Michoacan throughout much of the 20th century. They had vast plantations around towns like Aguila and Uruapan, which employed a lot of local people. They capitalized on the region's fertile lands and strategic location, which provided access to Mexico City, Pacific ports, and highways leading north. Despite their successes in the avocado industry, the Valencia family in the late 50s and early 60s began to shift some of their focus to the growth of marijuana, realizing the growing appetite for the plant in the United States. Not only did they start growing marijuana, but they also started to dabble in opium growth and production. The Valencia family became known as reliable providers of these crops to larger criminal groups further north, especially in the state of Sinaloa, and they grew increasingly wealthy. However, US import laws at the time prevented them from expanding past the border. This would change, however, a couple of decades down the line with the creation of the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, which would go on to further increase the wealth of the Valencia family in the 1990s. Because of NAFTA, this inadvertently allowed the Valencia family to become involved in the cocaine trade, as Colombian connects had to find new ways to get their product into the USA, and the Valencia family were an early beneficiary of this change in the criminal underworld. But back to Mencho, it was in the late 1970s where he went out looking for work to bring in some extra money for his family, and he ended up getting a job at around 13 or 14 years old, guarding a marijuana plantation belonging to the Valencia family. This is believed to be Mencho's first foray into the criminal underworld. After a few years of doing menial work for the Valencia family, Mencho decided that he wanted a better life for himself, and he immigrated illegally to the USA in the state of California in his late teenage years. In his late teens, he also grew close to members of the Valencia family, including Abigail Gonzalez Valencia, aka El Queenie, who many described to be the brains behind Mencho in his early years. He also met his future wife, the sister of Abigail Valencia, Rosalinda Valencia Gonzalez, who he apparently lived with in America. Rosalinda already had one child prior to meeting Mencho, Julio Alberto Castillo Rodriguez, who has gone on to become a key high-ranking figure within CJNG in present time. To conceal his identity in the USA, Mencho used many different names and combinations like Ruben Avila, Jose Lopez Prieto, Miguel Valadez, Carlos Hernandez Mendoza, and Roberto Salgado, amongst several others. While in America, Mencho also got his girlfriend Rosalinda pregnant. By 1986, Mencho was living in the Bay Area, where he was then arrested by San Francisco police for possession of stolen property and a loaded gun. A booking photo is available from the incident, and it shows a 19-year-old Mencho wearing a hoodie and donning a blank expression, acne on his baby face. 2 months later, his first child was born. What isn't clear, however, is if Mencho served any time for this incident. What is known is that Mencho crossed the border several more times throughout the late 80s, smuggling drugs under a variety of aliases. Around this time, Mencho also began to dabble in the meth trade, according to both the DEA and Mexican authorities. Alongside his future brother-in-law Abigail Valencia, Mencho became involved in meth production and trade in San Francisco's Redwood City. In 1989, Mencho was busted yet again, this time for selling narcotics, and he was quickly deported from the States. This setback, however, would not deter Mencho. He once again entered the USA illegally, and he once again settled in San Francisco. In September of 1992, he was arrested once more, though this time on much more serious federal drug charges in Sacramento, California. According to reports, Mencho, along with his brother Abraham, were at a San Francisco bar called Imperial to carry out a heroin deal. To be precise, 5 ounces of the substance for $9,500. Abraham, being the older brother, was in charge of this deal, while Mencho was acting as a lookout. Mencho, who was 26 years old at the time, much younger than his brother, noticed that the deal looked off, and he had a hunch that it was a police setup. Abraham, however, conducted and carried out the deal as planned. Money in hand, Abraham thought nothing of it. However, in a conversation that was wiretapped by police, Mencho explained to his older brother that the money that they had received looked too clean and neat, and that the notes were perfectly stacked, leading him to believe that the deal was set up by undercover police. Mencho warned his brother never to do business with them again, though the writing was on the wall. The pair's American dream was nearing its end. 3 weeks after the drug deal, both El Mencho and his brother Abraham were arrested under drugs charges. In court, El Mencho insisted that he was innocent. He said that he was not involved in the heroin deal, and that the undercover agents were lying about him and his brother handling the drugs. The prosecution insisted that both siblings were working together. Over 30 years later, neither the prosecutor nor Mencho's court-appointed defense attorney can recall many details about the case. However, some court transcripts remain. Court transcripts depict Mencho as a shrewd and defiant defendant who throughout his trial was fiercely loyal to his brother Abraham. He apparently also showed a dark sense of humour in his fight against the case, with court transcripts detailing about how he complained about his lawyer. Mencho stated, "Whenever I talk to him, he tells me the same thing, so I try to talk with him as little as possible." Mencho continued to insist that he was innocent, that he had nothing to do with the deal, and that the agents were lying about seeing him handle the heroin, though the prosecutor had a mountain of evidence confirming that Mencho and his brother were a team. Mencho was left in a difficult position. If Mencho didn't plead guilty, then Abraham, with 2 felony drug convictions already to his name, would be facing a possible life sentence. Nemesio went back and forth on what to do. He stated, "Given a jury trial, I think I would be able to win it myself," he told the skeptical judge. But in the end, he decided to plead guilty to protect his brother from a possible life sentence in prison. During sentencing, in a sarcastic manner, he asked the judge to please give me the least possible. Her response, "I would suspect you would say that." Mencho was then sentenced to 5 years at the Big Spring Correctional Center, a private prison in West Texas that mainly housed undocumented immigrants. During his prison sentence, it's speculated that Mencho made many connects, from traffickers to violent thugs, many of which he would recruit later in life when he formed CJNG. After serving only 3 years of his 5-year sentence, the 30-year-old Mencho was then released from prison on parole and was deported back to Mexico in late 1996 or early 1997. When Mencho arrived back in Mexico, it's believed that he travelled back to his home state of Michoacán for a few months, before then relocating to Jalisco, to be specific, in the town of Tomatlan, where, despite his criminal past, he became a state police officer. Jalisco State Police at the time were viewed as one of the most corrupt forces in Mexico. It's also printed in several sources that it was at this time when Mencho married Rosalinda Valencia, but other sources stated they married much earlier. While still serving, Mencho would again link up with the Valencia family, and he began to work with them, possibly utilising his police connects to assist in drug transportation, as well as conducting hits. During the late 90s, it's believed that Mencho would act as a hitman and a security chief for key members of the Valencia family, who at the time were growing in stature and power. The family had become one of the most influential crime clans in Mexico, though they were not recognised as a traditional cartel, and times were changing. Groups were becoming more well-armed, specifically the Gulf Cartel, the Sinaloa Cartel, as well as the Juarez and Tijuana cartels. So by the year 2000, the Valencia clan chose to rebrand to the Milenio Cartel, marking of course the new millennium, but also the changing times in the Mexican underworld. They essentially modernized. They were led by Armando Valencia Cornelio, aka Maradona. After a couple of years in the force, Mencho left the police to join the Milenio Cartel full-time. They were prominent in Michoacán and the surrounding states, especially in the Tierra Caliente region. Armando Valencia Cornelio, aka Maradona, was a charismatic cartel leader and was excellent at networking and brokering alliances and business relationships with other cartels as well as law enforcement. He sought alliances across Mexico to allow marijuana, heroin and cocaine to reach the US border. To do so, he entrusted a Mencho associate, Carlos Rosales Mendoza, to broker ties with the Gulf Cartel, another powerful clan which controlled much of Mexico's border with Texas. Carlos Rosales Mendoza, another cold, calculated but charismatic gangster, was a leader of La Familia Michoacana, the other major cartel in Michoacán state, and in the early years, both the Milenio Cartel and La Familia had an excellent working relationship. Rosales had become a very close friend of Gulf Cartel boss Osiel Cardenas, and as a result, La Familia became allies of the Gulf Cartel, and rather importantly in doing so, they gained access to their Tamaulipas route, which contained corridors into the United States. But as well as acquiring drug routes, which of course are very important, they also gained access to the training expertise of the Gulf's most fierce sicarios, Los Zetas. La Familia Michoacana, thanks to this new alliance, grew in stature and power, as did the Milenio Cartel, who also benefited from La Familia's relationship with the Golfos, as they also used the Tamaulipas border crossing to pass drugs. It was a perfect cartel alliance and everybody was making money, but these relationships within the Mexican criminal underworld rarely last, as was the case with the relationship between the Milenio and La Familia organizations. Though the reason is not the usual story of greed. La Familia kingpin, Carlos Rosales Mendoza, had fallen in love with a woman known as Inés, who was none other than El Mencho's cousin, and they quickly became an item. However, Inés, behind the back of Rosales, began an affair with the leader of the Milenio Cartel and close friend of Rosales, Armando Valencia Cornelio, aka Maradona. In the very early 2000s, Rosales found out about the affair, and he was consumed with anger and rage, and he vowed revenge, not only on Armando, but the whole Valencia clan and anyone associated with them, meaning the entire Milenio Cartel, including El Mencho, who at the time was a security chief for Valencia family members, as well as in charge of cartel hit squads. At this time, Mencho, despite being in the inner circle of Milenio leadership, was in the trenches. Backed by the Gulf Cartel, Rosales turned against the Mencho organization, promising bounties for anyone who could kill a member of the Valencia family, even including their dogs. For the next year or so, the two groups were warring in Michoacan state, and the Mencho organization were barely holding on to territory, as La Familia were much better equipped and had more manpower. The writing was on the wall by 2002. At this point in the war, La Familia were helped out by the Gulf Cartel, and the Golfos sent their most feared gunman, Los Zetas, down to Michoacan state, and it was an absolute bloodbath. They were dropping Mencho gunmen like flies, with Mencho himself on the front line. The Mencho cartel were barely able to contend with La Familia, and the introduction of the Zetas sealed their fate. By late 2003, hundreds had died, but to make matters worse, Maradona was arrested in a military operation, plunging the Mencho organization into further peril. Not only did their leader get captured, but Mencho's story very nearly ended here in 2003. While leading a smaller group of gunmen in Michoacan, Mencho, along with his men, were captured by gunmen belonging to La Familia Michoacana, a specific faction known as the 12 Apostles. Mencho and his men were lucky not to get killed on the spot. Instead, Mencho was kidnapped and taken to see a man known as Jose de Jesus Mendez Vargas, aka El Chango Vargas, the Ape, a high-ranking leader within La Familia, as well as in charge of the 12 Apostles hit squad. Now, you would think at this point Mencho was done for, probably destined for a brutal demise at the hands of El Chango Vargas. However, for unknown reasons, Vargas let Mencho live. Allegedly, this tale is confirmed by intelligence reports, but again, the reasons for El Chango letting Mencho live are unknown, as Mencho back then was severely disliked by La Familia leadership. People have speculated that in order to spare his life, Mencho flipped on his boss Armando, leading him to get captured in late 2003, and although this in no way has been confirmed and is mere speculation, I do think it's plausible. Some sources state that after this incident, Mencho responded by sending a hit squad to take out one of El Chango's brothers, despite Chango sparing his life. Again, I have to state, I'm not sure how true this story is, but it's been claimed several times online. By late 2003, it was over for the Mencho cartel, and the remnants of the group, including Mencho, were kicked out of Michoacan, and they relocated to Jalisco, with the cartel leaders viewing it as almost a biblical type of exile from their homeland. Once the Mencho cartel were kicked out of Michoacan, they had to go cap in hand to the Sinaloa cartel, with whom they had a good working relationship with. The Mencho operation were then de facto led by Sinaloan kingpin Ignacio Nacho Coronel, the King of Crystal. Coronel, known for his methamphetamine expertise, was instrumental in keeping the Mencho cartel intact. His guidance allowed the Valencias to continue producing synthetic drugs and laundering money, skills critical to the Sinaloa cartel's operations, but at this point, the Mencho organization had lost its designation as an independent cartel, and they were now fully reliant on Sinaloa, using their drug routes and paying hefty fees as a result, reducing profit, but ultimately, they had no choice. The next few years of Mencho's life are a little hazy, however, what we do know is by the mid-2000s, Mencho was a high-ranking security chief within the Mencho organization, and was even starting to get involved in his own drug deals. The Flores twins, Pedro and Margarito Flores, were both major drug traffickers from Chicago who became top US distributors for the Sinaloa cartel, working directly with the likes of El Chapo Guzman, Ismael Zambada, and Arturo Beltran Leyva. In the late 2000s, they turned informants and helped US authorities convict El Chapo by secretly recording conversations and providing key evidence. As a result, the twins received a more lenient sentence for their crimes and are now free men. The twins have made various appearances on podcasts, and during one with YouTuber Chill Ill Reacts, the twins mentioned that they had indeed met El Mencho during their criminal careers, and the details that they share are very interesting. During the mid-2000s, the twins arranged and had a meeting with Chinese suppliers of pseudoephedrine in Puerto Vallarta in Jalisco state. The deal was for $25 million worth of pseudo, which the twins planned to smuggle across the border into California, where they had a chemist to turn it into $80 million worth of crystal meth. After the meeting, the Chinese suppliers as well as the twins went to a strip club. However, shortly after their arrival, the club was flooded by masked gunmen, and the Flores twins as well as their suppliers were kidnapped and bundled into vans. One of the Flores twins attempted to buy his and his brother out of captivity, but the head kidnapper retorted, "You could have paid me when you had the chance." At this point, the Flores twins realised that they hadn't been kidnapped by rivals but instead the police. Apparently, one of the masterminds behind the kidnap was a police officer who approached Pedro Flores at his wedding and tried to extort him, but Pedro turned him away, and this kidnapping was the result of the Flores twins not playing ball. The kidnapper's plan was to hand the twins over to the feds. It's worth noting that the twins' wives were also kidnapped during this event, and one had apparently managed to notify Arturo Beltran-Leyva of the situation, who was one of the most successful Mexican traffickers at the time, right up there with El Chapo and El Mayo. Arturo Beltran-Leyva contacted the kidnappers and offered huge bribes to release the twins, up to $5 million, however, the kidnappers refused. This was a spanner in the works. Nobody said no to Arturo, El Jefe de Jefes. This caused panic among the Sinaloa hierarchy, as the twins were huge assets to their distribution networks into the states, and they were scrambling for solutions to solve the issue. Chapo, El Mayo and the Beltran-Leyvas brainstormed ideas, before Chapo then made a call to Jalisco, where the Mencho cartel were now operating as a subsidiary of the Sinaloa cartel. They asked for the services of none other than the up-and-coming El Mencho, who was involved in cartel security. Mencho acted quickly. He sent hundreds of gunmen to Puerto Vallarta, where the twins were being held. Under Mencho's orders, his men blocked the roadways in and out of Puerto Vallarta, and he also blocked the roadways to the local airport, so the police kidnappers could not get the Flores twins out. Bear in mind, this group of police officers essentially conducted these kidnappings on their own, and had little support, so they were vastly outnumbered and outgunned by Mencho's men. As a result of the situation, the police kidnappers released the twins. Bear in mind, this occurred in and around the mid-2000s, I believe 2004 or 2005, long before Mencho was the household name that he would go on to become. But even back then, he was able to mobilise hundreds of gunmen. During podcasts, the Flores twins have discussed their brief dealings with Mencho, and what's noteworthy is, despite Mencho being the one who got them out of Dodge, the way they describe him is interesting. During a podcast with Chi Il Reacts, the twins mentioned that Mencho even back then was known for his vicious nature. Pedro mentioned that in the mid-2000s, they didn't do business with Mencho, as Mencho at the time was primarily involved in cartel security. However, Pedro did mention that Mencho was pushing weed at the time, and that they had no interest in pushing bud. He claimed that Mencho wasn't at the level to where they needed to do business with him. However, Margarito interjected and stated, "Well, to be honest, he wasn't the type of person that I wanted to do business with. How about that?" Margarito stated that they had a relationship and met a few times, but claimed that he wasn't the perfect businessman by any means. I would highly recommend listening to podcasts with the Flores twins, as they shed interesting details on the high-ranking Sinaloa cartel bosses at the time, as well as people like Mencho. But let's move on. The Mencho cartel did not forget their feud with La Familia Michoacana and the Zetas, the latter being an enemy they shared with their new Sinaloan bosses. This gave rise to a group known as Los Mata-Zetas, or the Zeta Killers in English, an armed group made up of both Sinaloan and Mencho gunmen, whose sole mission was to target and kill members of Los Zetas. The Mata-Zetas, apparently a brainchild of Nacho Coronel, were notorious for their ruthless campaigns against the Zetas, killing dozens of alleged members at a time in gruesome ways. In June 2009, the armed group made themselves public. They left an abandoned truck in a residential neighbourhood in Cancun, Quintana Roo, where the Mexican authorities discovered the corpses of 3 men. Along with their butchered remains was found the following message: "We are the new group, Mata-Zetas, and we are against kidnapping and extortion, and we will fight them in all states for a cleaner Mexico." The Valencia family and the Mencho organization, under Coronel's guidance, helped the Sinaloa cartel secure strategic drug routes and chemical precursor imports, strengthening their position in Mexico's lucrative meth trade. However, the fragile balance of power began to unravel in 2010, Firstly, the Milenio Cartel suffered a major blow with the arrests of Oscar Orlando and Juan Nava Valencia, known as El Lobo and El Tigre, two key leaders holding the Milenio Cartel together. Though the biggest blow would come in July of 2010 when Nacho Coronel was killed in a shootout with Mexican authorities. Many speculate that Nacho was set up by El Chapo, who apparently had been becoming concerned with Coronel's growing power and was fearful that he would eventually go it alone with his new buddies in the Milenio organization. Ultimately, with Nacho dead and high-ranking Milenio Cartel leaders captured, this caused a power vacuum within what was left of the Milenio Cartel. One sect within the Milenio Cartel wanted to appoint as the leader of the group Elpidio Majaro Ramirez, aka El Pilo, and Ramiro Pozos Gonzalez, aka El Mocha, who worked closely with Oscar Orlando and Juan Carlos before their arrests. Eric Valencia Salazar, one of the clan members, wanted Mencho to take control. The likes of El Pilo and El Mocha blamed Mencho and Nacho Coronel for the capture of Oscar Orlando and Juan Nava Valencia. The two sides would bitterly dispute who should be leader, with tit-for-tat attacks occurring on both sides, though this culminated when a group of Mencho's men were killed in Colima by gunmen in late summer 2010. El Mencho then asked the other Milenio bloc to hand over Gerardo Mendoza, aka Tecate, for being the orchestrator of the killings. Elpidio Majaro Ramirez and Ramiro Pozos Gonzalez refused to hand him over, and the brutal but short Milenio civil war then kicked off. The Milenio Cartel split into two. One side was known as La Resistencia, the Resistance, and the other was Mencho's side, Los Torcidos, or the Twisted Ones in English. Pivotally, Mencho also absorbed Los Matazetas after Nacho Coronel was killed, giving him more firepower in the civil war. Following a short but bloody battle, Mencho and his men had defeated the resistance, and they claimed what was left of the Milenio Cartel, as well as now having absorbed Los Matazetas. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, aka El Mencho, was now effectively a cartel leader, and he became the first man not blood-related to the Valencias to run the organisation, but he still had a lot of work to do, and 2011 would be a year of establishment and war for Mexico's newest crime boss. In spring of 2011, the newly created CJNG declared war on all other Mexican cartels, and stated that its first goal was to take control of the city of Guadalajara in Jalisco state. The city would quickly become CJNG's home base. CJNG, who also went by other names at the time such as Los Matazetas and Los Torcidos, re-established a brief relationship with the Sinaloa cartel. Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generacion's first noted atrocity came in September of 2011, where two trucks containing 35 dead bodies were found at an underpass near a shopping mall in Boca del Rio, Veracruz. All of the corpses were alleged to be members of Los Zetas, but it was later proven that only 6 of them had been involved in minor crime incidents, and none of them were involved with organised crime. Many of the bodies had shown signs of severe torture. According to the news network El Universal, at around 5 PM on September the 20th, 2011, an undetermined number of vehicles blocked a major avenue in Boca del Rio. Once the traffic stopped, armed men abandoned 2 trucks in the middle of a highway. They opened the doors of the trucks and pulled out 35 corpses, leaving a written message behind. Other gunmen pointed their weapons at frightened drivers. The gunmen then fled the scene. Consequently, the stunned motorists began to grab their cell phones and post messages on Twitter, warning other drivers to avoid the area. The message left behind stated the following: "No more extortions, no more killings of innocent people. Zetas in the state of Veracruz and the politicians helping them. This is going to happen to you, or we can shoot you, as we did to you guys before. People of Veracruz, do not allow yourself to be extorted. Do not pay for protection. Because if you do, it's because you want to. This is the only thing these people, Los Zetas, can do. This is going to happen to all of these Zeta shits who continue to operate in Veracruz. This territory has a new proprietor." Days following the massacre, Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generacion, while using the Matazeta's name, posted a series of videos claiming credit for the massacre. This incident would essentially become one of many perpetrated by CJNG, who by late 2012 had abandoned their previous names, Los Matezetes and Los Torcidos, solely becoming Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación. What would follow would be a brutal pursuit of new territory. Firstly, Mencho would totally turn his back on the Sinaloa cartel, severing ties completely when he ordered his men to clean out Guadalajara of Sinaloa cartel drug dealers. CJNG confirmed their split from the Sinaloa cartel in February of 2013 when they released a video statement in which they reported that they and the Sinaloa cartel were no longer allies. With the city of Guadalajara and the wider state of Jalisco now under Mencho's control, a brutal and bloody expansion campaign was then launched. This campaign, while on the surface looking unsophisticated due to its violent nature, was actually very calculated. Cartel Jalisco targeted Mexican states such as Colima and Veracruz, states that contain seaports, vital for shipping in precursor chemicals from China and India to produce synthetic drugs. They also targeted states that contained both drug routes and production facilities, such as Guerrero, Michoacán, and Zacatecas. These states in particular have become increasingly more violent following the arrival of CJNG. Cartel Jalisco are more than just traffickers, however, as noted in Michoacán, where extortion has become a plague. They have been known to extort avocado and lime farmers, and have even stolen land to grow their own crops, sometimes cutting down protected forests and nature reserves to do so, scarring the landscape. They've also killed many local farmers to steal their land. Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación have adopted the policy akin to squeezing blood from a stone. Anything of value in the area, they will target. We have also seen this in the state of Guanajuato, a state known for its oil pipelines. Prior to CJNG, a group dedicated to oil theft known as the Santa Rosa de Lima Cartel controlled much of Guanajuato. However, CJNG invaded the states in the mid-2020s, making it one of Mexico's most violent. Cartel Jalisco were widely successful in reducing the influence of the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel, especially after the arrest of their boss, Jose Antonio Yepes Ortiz, aka El Marro, the Sledgehammer. Much like other groups in Mexico, Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación have also turned their attention to human trafficking, which is why they launched aggressive campaigns in Tabasco and Chiapas states. These states border with Guatemala, and controlling these states, or at least having some control, gains Cartel Jalisco access to illegal immigrants coming in who are looking to get to America. Traditionally, these states have always been relatively peaceful, but Cartel Jalisco's presence in these areas has resulted in a drastic increase in violence. During the early years of CJNG, under Mencho's leadership, they adopted similar tactics to those of Los Zetas, shock and awe with pure brutality. However, at the time, many in Mexico and internationally didn't grasp what was happening. The birth of a criminal organization superpower was happening in front of our very eyes, but at the time, Los Zetas were taking up the headlines due to their brutal nature, and Mexican authorities were largely focusing on the Zeta group, despite CJNG seemingly following a similar tactical approach. Again, in 2012, Mencho's story very nearly ended once again, as he was nearly captured by authorities according to a variety of reports, though what actually happened on this day is largely shrouded in mystery. On the 25th of August 2012, a unit of the Mexican Federal Police based in Tonoya, Jalisco, responded to an anonymous tip stating that there was an organised crime gang present in a rural community close by. When the security forces got to the area, a fierce shootout broke out between the two parties, and this resulted in the deaths of at least 6 CJNG operatives. Initial reports online stated that El Mencho was captured in the operation, but the Mexican government later confirmed that he was not in custody. US authorities had also apparently informed Mexican authorities based on their surveillance of the property and surrounding area that Mencho was indeed spotted at the location, and that a female acquaintance of his, who was also at the property, was importing meth at Gulfport, Mississippi. In a series of highly coordinated attacks to prevent El Mencho's arrest, the CJNG blocked several highways and roads across the Guadalajara metropolitan area by setting at least 37 vehicles on fire. The purpose of the burning vehicles was to place them as blockades to impede the security forces from travelling across Jalisco's capital and giving El Mencho ample time to escape. The blockades were placed in strategic routes to prevent police reinforcements to come in or leave Guadalajara. After the attacks were over, the government later confirmed that El Mencho was in the area and had evaded capture. Following his narrow escape in 2012, El Mencho's public infamy grew, and he would quickly become one of the world's most wanted criminals. His organisation were fighting rivals in various states, tooth and nail for new territory, committing heinous acts while doing so, such as dismemberments, beheadings, and attacks on innocent civilians. As the 2010s rolled on by, CJNG for a short period of time were not just at war with their rivals, but also the Mexican government. On the 19th of March 2015, in Ocotlan, Jalisco, CJNG gunmen ambushed a federal police convoy. The total death toll was 11, 5 police officers, 3 civilians, and 3 CJNG gunmen. The attack was a response by the CJNG to protect El Mencho, who was reportedly in the area for a meeting. On the 23rd of March of the same year, a close friend of El Mencho, Heriberto Cardenas, aka El Gringo, was killed in a shootout with the federal police in Zacahualan de Torres, Jalisco. 3 other Cartel Jalisco suspects were also killed. In response to his death, El Mencho commanded Cartel Jalisco to carry out attacks against the Mexican Federal Police. On the 30th of March of 2015, Cartel Jalisco gunmen in Zapopan, Jalisco ambushed a convoy containing Alejandro Solorio Arcega, Jalisco's security commissioner. Thankfully, nobody was killed in the fire exchange. On the 6th of April 2015, Cartel Jalisco gunmen blocked a road in San Sebastian del Oeste, Jalisco, with a burning vehicle, and then subsequently opened fire at a convoy of the Jalisco State Police, killing 15 policemen and wounding 5 more. The incident was the deadliest single attack on Mexico's police force since 2010. Ultimately, this was simply a message from Mencho to the police for them to stop meddling in Jalisco State. On the same day, Miguel Ángel Caicedo Vargas, the police chief of Zacahualan de Torres, was also killed by CJNG hitmen. 2015 had become a year of war for El Mencho, and many speculated that at the time, Mencho's days were numbered. The thought was that he and his organisation were simply making too much noise, causing too much violence, and affecting too many people, similar to the Zetas before them. Mencho again was very nearly captured in May of 2015. On May 1st, 2015, the Mexican government launched Operation Jalisco, a military-led campaign that intended to combat organised crime groups in Jalisco and capture their respective leaders, in particular El Mencho. The announcement came after a series of violent attacks from Cartel Jalisco in previous weeks. The day the operation was inaugurated, intelligence reports stated that El Mencho was in Tenoya, which prompted an offensive to apprehend him. As the security forces moved to the area where Mencho was allegedly hiding, a gunfight broke out between law enforcement officials and gunmen of Cartel Jalisco. In the small town of Villa Purificacion in Jalisco, El Mencho's men shot down a Mexican army helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade launcher, killing 9 soldiers. The battle extended throughout several municipalities in Jalisco. El Mencho's men blockaded several roads across the Guadalajara area to slow down the mobilization of law enforcement and facilitate their leaders' escape. Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generacion set 39 buses, 11 banks and 16 gas stations on fire. The attack spread through 20 different towns in 3 neighbouring states. One of the surviving crew from the downed helicopter was Agent Ivan Morales, and the injuries he suffered were severe. He was left disfigured and rarely showed himself in public, but was brave enough to testify against El Mencho's son, El Menchito, who is currently serving a 30-year sentence in a US prison. Ivan Morales, 10 years after the helicopter incident, was tragically gunned down by Cartel Jalisco assassins for testifying against Mencho's son. During the first half of 2015, the Mexican government were focused on the capture of El Mencho and the subsequent disintegration of his ever-growing criminal enterprise. However, Mencho, in July of that year, received respite from his growing manhunt, and this was due to the second escape of Sinaloa cartel kingpin Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, who on the 11th of July of 2015 escaped from his prison cell via the use of tunnels. This story was a national embarrassment for Mexico, as Chapo at the time was the most well-known trafficker in the world, and possibly the second most well-known in history after Pablo Escobar. Naturally, when Chapo escaped, Mexico, along with US authorities, turned their attention to the recapture of El Chapo. This resulted in the heat on Mencho dropping, and this also may have resulted in a tactical change from CJNG. Their attacks on government officials as well as police seemed to have cooled down by this point, though they still have engaged in such attacks as the years have passed, but not as frequently as they did in their earlier years, especially in the first half of 2015. Chapo was however recaptured again in January of 2016. According to the Mexican government, El Mencho may be hiding in the state of Jalisco, Cartel Jalisco's stronghold. They believe he does not stay in one place for long, and travels across several municipalities in Jalisco and into the states of Michoacán, Colima, and Nayarit. He usually travels across the mountains and rural terrains in these areas, since it provides multiple escape routes in the event that security forces attempt to encircle him. Authorities suspect that El Mencho's inner circle is made up of mercenaries with former military training. His second circle is much larger in size and serves as a rearguard to notify El Mencho's inner circle of suspicious activity and ambush potential parties that attempt to get close to him. It's believed that El Mencho lives a quiet and modest lifestyle, a far cry from the likes of El Chapo, for example. It's said he keeps his inner circle very small and refrains from partying, drugs, and alcohol. Not much is known of his personal tastes or hobbies, but he's said to have a fondness for cockfighting, sometimes apparently placing large bets on the fights. This hobby gave him his lesser-known nickname, El Señor de la Galos, or the Lord of the Roosters in English. CJNG's expansion in the last 10 to 15 years has led Mencho to become Mexico's most wanted criminal mind, with a bounty on his head by the DEA reaching $15 million. Since his rise to infamy, much has also been made of Nemesio Oseguera's health. In fact, numerous reports of his death have been made on social media over the years. Beginning around 2019 to 2020, intelligence reports indicated that El Mencho was suffering from kidney deficiency. To manage his condition discreetly, he reportedly had a private clinic constructed in the remote village of El Alquital, where he and sometimes locals received dialysis treatment. On the 25th of February 2025, Mexico's Secretary of Security, Omar Garcia Harfuch, confirmed publicly that El Mencho indeed suffers from a kidney deficiency. However, there was no new or more serious development disclosed at the time. In February of 2022, rumours circulated online claiming El Mencho had died of respiratory failure in a Guadalajara private hospital. These claims were compounded by narco-mantas, public cartel messages, some attributed to CJNG dissidents. Nonetheless, these reports remain unverified and lack confirmation. Despite such speculation, US authorities continue to regard him as alive. As late as December 2024, the US increased the reward for information leading to his arrest from $10 million to $15 million, signalling that they consider his capture both valid and ongoing. In 2022, a CJNG defector named Jose Bernabe Brizuela Meraz, aka La Vaca, poured fuel on the Mencho death rumours. Located in Colima State, La Vaca, a former CJNG member, formed a gang of Jalisco cartel defectors, and he named the group the Independent Cartel of Colima. One of their most notable publicity stunts was a narco banner left in Colima State that was personally signed by La Vaca. On the narco banner, La Vaca claimed that Mencho was dead, and he stated that "I only owe respect and loyalty to Mr. Mencho," and essentially that with Mencho now dead, according to him, then he was free to go it alone. Colima spiked in violence following La Vaca's departure, but CJNG quickly exterminated the breakaway faction. La Vaca was also arrested later in 2022, all but ending his organisation. The case of La Vaca is an interesting segue into another aspect of Mencho's leadership that goes under-discussed. As we all know, Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación are organised in a vertical leadership structure, meaning a top-down approach with Mencho being the undisputed kingpin. And what has been the most impressive aspect of his leadership is how he's been able to hold together the organisation without having any major internal war or disagreements, and when these incidents do happen, they are dealt with swiftly and violently, and they don't spread further. The most notable example of this would be the case of Carlos Enrique Sanchez Martinez, aka El Cholo. El Cholo, who was a high-ranking member of CJNG, was accused of murdering a high-level cartel financier called El Colombiano. Following the incident, El Cholo and several of his loyalists split from CJNG and created their own cartel, named the Nueva Plaza Cartel, which was based in the Guadalajara metropolitan area. El Mencho responded to the defection with a failed coup against El Cholo. Cholo and the Nueva Plaza Cartel retaliated by successfully assassinating the leader of a CJNG assault squad. 3 years later, in March of 2021, El Cholo was captured by CJNG sicarios, and his fate was utterly gruesome. After all, he had embarrassed Mencho for 3 years at this point. Before murdering El Cholo, CJNG gunmen forced El Cholo to confess on video to his crimes, in which he takes responsibility for the wave of violence that occurred in Jalisco during the prior weeks. Following the video's release, Cholo was murdered and his body was abandoned in a public square in the municipality of Tlaquepaque, along with a message embedded in his torso with a knife. The note simply stated, "The traitor El Cholo." The body was also wrapped up in black plastic bin liners. According to the autopsy carried out by forensics, it was revealed that El Cholo had 7 of his toes broken and 1 cut off, both legs broken at the level of the tibia, kneecap and femur, as well as having marks left by electric jump cables. His eyes and tongue were also extracted while he was still alive, and he had several other injuries around his body such as knife lacerations and broken ribs, along with 3 bullet wounds to the head, which are presumed to be the cause of his death. To put into perspective the level of torture, when his tongue was removed, it wasn't simply cut out with a knife. Instead, it was pulled out by a pressure implement, such as grips or pliers. Some rumours even suggest that Mencho may have been at the site where Cholo was tortured, or at least he dictated what types of torture should be implemented on El Cholo, though these are just rumours. The murder of El Cholo is just one of many examples of CJNG's creativity when it comes to cruelty. Around this time, in and around the late 2010s to early 2020s, CJNG became one of the most viral criminal organisations on the internet, highlighting another development in their strategy. They constantly posted videos showcasing armed groups parading around with assault rifles, armoured trucks and explosives. These videos would serve as both propaganda pieces, highlighting their strength, as well as being effective recruitment tools. But what CJNG were most notable for online at this time was their dissemination of execution videos, which would go on to become a staple and a calling card of the organisation. They released several cartel murder videos, known as gore videos online, many of which considered to be the most violent of their kind online. One example would include a gruesome video where CJNG sicarios butcher a member of a rival gang named Los Viagras. In the video, the sicarios sever the captive's limbs one by one, and at one point in the video, one of the sicarios takes a severed leg and he beats the captive with it. Another video, commonly known as Ghost Rider, shows a captive having his entire head doused in rubbing alcohol before being set ablaze. At the end of the video, the victim is still alive, but his entire head resembles a red skull. There are no discernible features left due to the burning. Lastly, another video, commonly titled Sponsored by Adidas, showcases a CJNG sicario cutting open the chest of a victim vertically. Exposing the man's inner organs, the sicario then takes his combat knife and cuts a slice off the victim's lung, all while he is still alive. The sicario then eats the organ meat. These are just a few examples of many such videos released by CJNG, and we have covered these on the channel previously. Within the last few years, CJNG have considered to be either Mexico's most powerful or second most powerful criminal organisation, depending on who you ask. They have a presence in at least 27 Mexican states and are dominant in 6 states. They also have international presence in other Latin American countries, notably Ecuador, where they sponsor groups such as Los Lobos in order to use their trafficking networks, involving cocaine coming in from Colombia. CJNG also have a presence in Guatemala. They are truly a transnational organisation, with their drugs not only being trafficked into the USA, but also into Europe and Australia. They have connects as far as Africa. In fact, much of the merchandise that makes its way to Europe first enters countries such as Senegal and Mauritania, and from there they are shipped to Europe, mainly Spain. Recently, the United States even indicted a Kenyan along with 3 other African foreign nationals, as well as a Bulgarian arms trafficker named Petr Dimitrov Merchev, who is also a Tanzanian resident, for conspiring to supply military-grade weapons to CJNG. The weaponry included machine guns, night vision equipment and sniper rifles, as well as anti-personnel mines and other explosives. The reach of the organisation transcends Mexico and America. They are truly a global criminal enterprise. In 2025, Mencho is still believed to be alive according to authorities, though he still evades capture, as he always has, ever since he returned to Mexico, having been deported from the States back in the 90s. He hasn't seen the inside of a jail since then, though he has suffered personal setbacks in this time. Notably his son, Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez, aka El Menchito, who was arrested in 2015 and subsequently deported to the USA, where he is now serving a long stretch in prison. Mencho's wife has also been in and out of prison for money laundering offences, though she is currently out of jail, having recently been granted early release due to good behaviour whilst in jail. Mencho's brother, Antonio Oseguera Cervantes, nicknamed El Tony Montana, is currently in the US judiciary, having been extradited in early 2025, following his 2022 arrest in Mexico, under charges of arms trafficking and money laundering. Lastly, Mencho's older brother Abraham is also in custody, though he is still being held in Mexico under charges of financial crimes, though it seems unlikely that Abraham will be extradited, though this may change in the coming months. Despite the setbacks, Mencho still continues to rule the CJNG outfit with a cult of personality. In 2025, CJNG and Mencho find themselves in the position that they have always dreamed of. They have the chance to become the #1 undisputed cartel of Mexico, and possibly even the biggest criminal organisation in the world. Their historic rivals and traditionally the biggest and most influential cartel in Mexico, CDS, Cartel de Sinaloa, are currently engaging in a bloody civil war which has completely split the organisation. CJNG have an involvement in this conflict and have chosen to ally themselves with Los Chapitos, led by Ivan Guzman Salazar, a son of El Chapo. Los Chapitos are fighting La Maíza, led by the son of Ismael Zambada Siqueiros, aka El Maito Flaco. Mencho supporting Los Chapitos makes sense, as Los Chapitos still have access to border states such as Sonora, Chihuahua and Baja California, which would make it even easier for CJNG to traffic drugs into the states. Access to the border has always been one of CJNG's weak spots historically, and this alliance could change that. In return for border access, it seems that CJNG are supporting Los Chapitos in their war with weaponry, training and even manpower. CJNG have also been at war with the Zambada faction of the Sinaloa cartel for several years, especially in Zacatecas state, and weakening them by supporting Los Chapitos may also mean that CJNG gain more power in Zacatecas. You can't talk about a Mexican drug cartel without at some point mentioning the Sinaloan organisation, and their fate, along with how the civil war pans out, will directly impact the future path of CJNG one way or another. But as of right now, they seem to be in an excellent position. Even if Los Chapitos lose, maybe this inadvertently makes it easier for CJNG to claim the border states for themselves, and should Los Chapitos win, it may mean that they continue to work together, again, still granting CJNG access to the border. In 2025, Mencho is arguably nearing the peak of his powers, and despite being extremely wanted by the authorities, those in Mexico and even the USA seem to be primarily focusing on the capture of El Chapo's sons who lead Los Chapitos, Jesus Alfredo Guzman Salazar, but most notably his brother Ivan Guzman Salazar. This new alliance, however, may actually backfire on Mencho in the long run, as it will possibly once again shine the spotlight on himself. Despite leading the deadliest and most violent organised crime group in Mexico since the Zetas, personal details of Mencho's life remain extremely sparse. There are only a handful of pictures of him available, none of which are recent, which makes identifying him tough for the authorities. For all we know, he may have taken steps to alter his appearance, such as plastic surgery. In 2016, in I believe September of that year, an audio tape however was leaked that detailed Mencho's voice, which I will play at the end of the video. In the audio call, Mencho is heard threatening a police officer whose unit was interfering with Mencho's business, despite Mencho paying them to look the other way. This is the last piece of major media detailing Mencho to be released to the public. Going forwards, I'm primarily going to be focusing on cartel biographics on narcos whose story is over, but Mencho is the exception because his story is not over, though his rise is peculiar and unique, so I felt I should start with him. When you look at his story from the start until now, it's filled with streaks of bizarre luck. For example, Chango Vargas letting him live when he was captured by La Familia Michoacana, from his narrow escapes from police raids, to him meeting Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, who was the one who opened the door to him for him to get close to the Valencia family. He's also one of a few cartel leaders whose origin story of him being on the front lines in his early days isn't exaggerated. I guess the last thing to address is again the death rumours. I for one don't believe that Mencho is dead, neither do law enforcement. If he has passed away, it would actually change the way CJNG should be viewed as a criminal organisation, as usually such incidents force power struggles within the affected organisation, but with CJNG, should he be dead, no such major power struggle has ever happened. In regards to Mencho, should he get killed or arrested, there are names that many speculate will be leadership candidates. Audias Flores Silva, aka El Jardinero, Juan Carlos Valencia Gonzalez, who is actually the stepson of El Mencho, Ricardo Ruiz Velasco, aka El Double R, and finally, Gonzalo Mendoza Gaitan, aka El Sapo. These are names that people should be looking out for in the coming months and years, all of which hold a great deal of power and influence within the organisation, especially Ricardo Ruiz Velasco and Audias Flores Silva. But that is the story of El Mencho. Well, the story up until now at least. What the future holds is only anyone's guess, though what we can guarantee, considering Mencho's past, is that it will inevitably involve a lot more pain and suffering for countless more people. But nevertheless, let's end this video straight from the horse's mouth.
Delta 1.
Hey, ¿quién habla?
Mira bien, hijo de tu puta madre. Soy Mencho, güey. Relaja tu puta gente a la verga. Soy Mencho, güey. Relaja tus putas partidas. Si no, te voy a partir tu madre tía toda tu bola de perros. Te tengo identificado 30 güeyes. Hasta tus putos perros te voy a matar si no te relajas, güey. ¿Cómo ves?
Ya está, señor, ahorita los bajo.
Oh, no cuelgues, hijo de la verga. Te tengo ubicado más en Chacala, güey.
No le estoy colgando, le estoy diciendo, ahorita los bajo.
Póngase de las pilas, güey. ¿Qué es que le puedes hacer amigo, cabrón? ¿Uno no se mete con ustedes para que se pasen de verga?
No, señor, ahorita yo se las bajo.
Pónganle, mire, revíremeles a todos los hijos de su puta madre, porque todos agarran dinero y son buenos de puercos.
Sí, es lo que me están
¿Se
diciendo.
me ponen a tiros o tú eres el primero que vas a marchar por ellos, León?
No, señor.
¿Vale?
No, señor, no se trata de eso.
Váyase a la verga, porque aquí los vergazos están al 220, ya se la sabe. Y miedo no hay.
No, señor, no se trata de eso. Ahorita yo lo traigo.
Entonces, si quieren amistad, aquí va a tener un amigazo, cabrón. Si no, a chingar a su madre a la verga.
No, yo sé, señor.
Ya estoy hasta la verga de que no entiendan, loco.
Señor, usted me conoce, usted sabe que yo soy amistad.
Pues por eso me extraña, cabrón. Yo te entiendo, güey, pero pues no mames, yo sé que tienes gente y la familia de chingada. Verga, pónganse las putas pilas.
Yo lo sé, señor. Nada más.
No quiero que me apagues este puto teléfono. Después te voy a marcar, güey. A ver si no se relajaron a la verga, ¿eh?
No, ahorita le voy a marcar.
A todos en general, güey. Relájenmelos a la verga. Por favor.
Ahorita le voy a marcar de otro número, a este número que me está marcando.
No, este ya no le vuelvas a marcar. Yo le marco cuando yo pueda.
Ándale, pues.
Pero no me lo apague porque lo voy a entender como negatividad.
No, señor, ahorita le mando un mensaje de otro número para que no marque los...
Ahora después, Melón, ahí les quiero eso, que se relajen a la verga.
Sí, señor, usted me conoce, usted sabe que hay respeto y hay amistad. Nada más.
Ya está, igualmente, de aquí para allá también. Ahí disculpen por las malas palabras.
Aquí los muchachos
¿Vale?
son los que están allá y usted yo se los saludo.
Ahora pues, ahí le encargo.
Ándale, sí.
Ahí relájenmelos a todos, dígale que va de parte mía.
Claro que sí, señor.
Ya está.
Ándale.